one of the important things to remember is to pull back a little bit from the homeschooling part of it, the academic part, and realize that you're having a relationship. That's one of the advantages of homeschooling is that you're educating them at the same time that you're continuing a relationship that would have maybe some breaks if they went off to school. So anything that you do, you want to do to preserve relationship. Think about the best teachers that you've ever had, right? They were probably people that nurtured a good relationship with you, and you want to make sure that you do that with your kids, and talk a lot. Communication is so important. They don't always understand why they're feeling the way they are and some of the difficulty that they're having, and so stepping back a little bit, getting some perspective, and then going back and offering, a conversation could be helpful.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. This episode of Homeschool Talks features a conversation originally hosted live on our Facebook page. So if you like what you hear, be sure to follow us there for more content like this. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoy the program.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to host this live Q&A about homeschooling 6th grade through 8th grade. We call that middle school. I am so excited to be here. I am so excited to have with me today the amazing Carla Fuller. But first, let me tell you who I am. I'm LaNissir James. I'm a homeschool mom of 7. I have 5 girls and 2 boys. And I'm so excited because I have one headed to middle school and one headed out of middle school. I am one of the high school educational consultants here at HSLDA, as well as the outreach coordinator. I am so excited to have with me today someone who's new on our team, the beautiful Carla Fuller. Let me tell you a little bit about Carla. Carla joins us at HSLDA with 2 master's degrees, one in child and family studies, and the other one in marriage and family therapy. She's a homeschool mom. She's graduated 2 homeschool sons, and we're so very excited because she's been homeschooling from pre-K to college. So we're very excited to have you, Carla. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, LaNissir. And I'm happy to be here too. And I'm happy for everyone who's going to join us today. LaNissir and I both know from experience, as she just said, that the 6th through 8th grade years are a pivotal time for you and for your children, for your homeschool. It's a chance to build memories and build relationships, but there can be challenges too. And so
Yes.
finding support for the questions that you have, and getting guidance on your homeschool journey is really important. It's one of the reasons that we educational consultants exist, and we're excited to host this live and to help with some of those questions. So let's get started.
Yes. So the transition for middle school can be, like you said, pivotal, right?
Hmm.
Perhaps coming from elementary school into middle school, the workload,
Hmm.
right? Social, emotional. There's all kinds of aspects of how an elementary school student is very different from a middle school student. Wouldn't you say, Carla?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a time of sweeping changes physically and emotionally and socially. It's probably the most similar to what you find from a newborn to a 2 or 3-year-old. You think about when you hold that baby in your arms and what they're like then at 2 and 3. There's a lot of changes. And some of those changes can be surprising to parents. You think you know your child, and then all of a sudden they become new in some aspects. And just like a toddler, their personality emerges, you learn things about them. You begin to learn new things about your middle schooler as well. And some of those things that you learn, they fluctuate. They fluctuate sometimes unpredictably. We
Yes.
call that period, early adolescence and puberty. So there's a lot going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I know this challenging too for parents as well, right? I
Mhm.
know that with my middle school students over the years, uh, there's a fight, right, to keep them
Mhm.
youthful and happy and
Mhm.
joyful. What do you think that parents need to do to prepare their students to come into middle school? What would be kind of top on your list?
Well, I think part of it is to understand that some of the changes that are taking place in your children that prepare them for middle school are happening naturally. Cognitively, they're developing, they're increasing in their ability to think abstractly, and so some of those changes are happening just automatically, just them being in the room. Some of that you don't have to do anything about. The subjects that you'll be teaching them, the things that you'll be doing, you'll be building on the foundation that you already laid for them in elementary years. So you'll notice the subjects won't change. Some of the assignments will be a little bit more challenging for them, but their cognitive level has increased to be able to meet some of the increase in demand in those subjects.
Wonderful. And I love what Thea said. She said, yeah, my 12-year-old is completely different boy. Oh my gosh. And
Absolutely.
how can I support him positively during these physical and emotional changes without me losing my mind? I think
Oh,
that's a question
yeah.
for everyone with middle
Yes.
schoolers, right?
Absolutely, it is. And I think one of the important things to remember is to pull back a little bit from the homeschooling part of it, the academic part, and realize that you're having a relationship. That's one of the advantages of homeschooling is that you're educating them at the same time that you're continuing a relationship that would have maybe some breaks if they went off to school. So anything that you do, you want to do to preserve relationship. Think about the best teachers that you've ever had, right? They were probably people that nurtured a good relationship with you, and you want to make sure that you do that with your kids, and talk a lot. Communication is so important. They don't always understand why they're feeling the way they are and some of the difficulty that they're having, and so stepping back a little bit, getting some perspective, and then going back and offering, a conversation could be helpful.
Yes, I love that. And we have another question. I love what Thea heard your question. Someone else, Felix said, this is my second year homeschooling my daughter. She's in seventh grade. I wanted to know how to prepare her for high school and college, and what do I need to be able to provide? I think that's a great question. I know we
That is
touched
a
a little
great
bit on
question.
curriculums, but let's
Right.
just go with what needs to happen. All of us, but both of us are working in the high school office. What
Mhm.
needs to happen in middle school
Mhm.
prior to them getting to high school? And
Mhm.
one of the things that I always say is, you kind of begin with the end in mind. So if you know
Absolutely.
you have a middle school student who is preparing themselves for high school, there are ways that they can get high school credit,
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
subjects like algebra
Mhm.
and, a physical science or above, and also high school foreign languages. A lot of this advanced preparation for high school begins in middle school. So it's those
Yes.
eighth grade credits that are moving forward, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, yes. And the math and the science and the foreign language, definitely those 8th grade credits transfer. And also, I think building in activities that help them gain a sense of who they are. And like you were saying, LaNissir, you're preparing them for high school, beginning with the end in mind. Is college in the works? Is it the military? Is it sports? What is it? And so you start adding in classes and activities that help them gain a little bit of understanding about that. One of our sons is getting his degree in electrical engineering, and he started in robotics clubs when he was in the middle school years. And that really informed for him a love of all things robotics and electronics. And he ended up choosing that as a major, and it wasn't anything that we did in our homeschool. I think one of the things you'll find is that often what our children end up doing is not anything we had anything to do with, but we just gave them the tools and paved an open path for them to find what it is they're called to do, at least
I
for the
love
time
it.
being, because sometimes that changes.
Oh, yes, it will change. But I love what you're saying, Carla, about the extracurricular activities
Mhm,
and your son doing the robotics and
mhm,
preparing him. I know for my high school son, he's in high school, 10th grade now.
mhm.
He is in economics, but he's been loving to work with his hands. And so
Right.
even with him going into business. But that started really early. Now he's building and cutting and doing all kinds of things. And
Hmm.
but those are the things that start in middle school. So
That's
it's
right.
always good. I love what you said. It has nothing to do probably with the academics. The things that they enjoy doing will
Hmm.
shape itself into their career, college, extracurricular, and beyond.
That's
So
right.
I love that. I
That's right.
love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Go ahead. What was you going to
Well,
say?
I was just going to say, and we're also giving them the tools for lifelong learning so that as they continue beyond us, they can continue to learn. So those are really important. If we sometimes I think parents get really intimidated about, as their kids get up in grades and, how am I going to teach them? And I think if we just think about tooling and adding a few more tools in the toolbox for them that they can then use, I think, and involving them in the process as much as possible, I think that'll hold us all in good stead.
I love that. We have a question here about
Okay.
finishing early. Someone asked a
Mm.
question about finishing early and
Mhm.
what it takes if you decide you want your homeschooler to finish early. And
Mhm.
I love that because it's
Yes.
possible. And I think sometimes when you have a kid who's very, very early, maybe they started in seventh grade
Right.
and then eighth grade, sometimes you don't know until you get further down the years that
Mhm.
perhaps your student should go ahead and finish early.
Mhm.
Because like you said, they may change their mind. So
That's
our
right.
seventh grader who may be doing high school credit in eighth
Mhm.
grade and then ninth grade, by the time they get to those high school years, you obviously have a student who is clearly dual enrolling or graduating
Right.
early.
That's
So
right.
there's so much that happens. I'm so excited that we get a chance to talk about middle school because
Right.
I dare say that middle school is the foundation to the success in high school because you don't
Well,
want to start
yeah.
scared, starting these skills at the beginning of high school. Even if your kid is going towards careers, right?
Mhm.
Resume,
Mhm.
good work ethic, character building, all of
Absolutely.
that starts in middle school.
Yeah, those life skills, when we were at one of our college visits, it was amazing the orientation. One of the women said, "You will be amazed at how many freshmen come on campus. They've never done their own laundry. They've never gone grocery shopping for themselves. There's a lot of life skills that they come on campus having to do independently that they've never learned how to do." And,
Yes.
high school is just 4 years and it flies by. It's
Oh,
amazing
yes.
how, when they're little, you think this is never going to end. The saying that, the days are long, the years are short. It's actually really true. And I think it seems accelerated when you're educating them. And so preparing them for those things while you have this good stretch of time is important because in high school, now you're working on the transcript, now you're working on the credits, now you're doing all those things. And so it's a good time to build that foundation. But getting to
Yes.
the question about graduating early, I think a lot of homeschoolers accelerate in their program. And one of the things to ask yourself as a parent and also the student is why. What is your goal? Keep your why in mind. That's important because even though they go through, what are they going off to, right? Are they prepared
Yes.
emotionally for it?
Yes.
Do they have a plan? Are they finishing early so that they can go on the mission field or so they can travel or so that they can work or if they're involved in sports? There has to be, I think, a really good reason to propel them out because once they're out, we lose a little leverage, we lose a little influence on them. And so I think these are really
Yes.
important years to build the things that, again, they are going to need to be successful long term.
I love that. Here's another question, Carla. It says, do you have any pointers? This is Thea. So, do you have any pointers to finding mentors in the areas that your
Oh.
children love to do? And I think that this is so
Oh,
crucial.
it's so important.
My son LJ, even today, is going to be working with a gentleman who runs a construction building, building decks. And whereas he's new to building decks, he's been building smaller things.
Mhm.
It's good find like-minded either business people or
Yes,
educators. I have so many friends who are experts in their field who become
right.
great mentors. And guess what? Here's the good news. Those people become perfect to write letter or recommendations for your students.
That is
So
very true.
finding
Yes.
mentors are important. What did you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think it's really important. Mentors don't have to be people who are outside of the family. They can be people within the family. It could
Yes.
be a relative, an uncle, a cousin, a grandparent, someone who will take them under their wing and help them. Someone, if you are involved in a faith community, sometimes it's those people people, anyone that you trust that is exhibiting the character traits that you wouldn't mind replicated in your child, those are good mentors to have. I wish there was some kind of a program. I know that there was something like discovery clubs where people who had skill in certain areas would partner, but those programs are church specific. And I wish there was something a little bit more formal, that parents could tap into. But hopefully we all have someone in our life, and maybe they're not someone who can lead them to a career, but again, maybe there's someone who can help them with a character trait. My sons had my mother-in-law, their grandmother, who really helped them a lot and was very pivotal in helping them develop a number of good characters and values. Yeah, character traits and
Yes.
values.
And they're great programs like Awana. They're things that they can connect to.
That's true.
Lisa
Yes.
has a question I want to just throw in here. She said, how did you get your son involved in robotics in middle school? And also that she has a son who loves and taught himself coding. I love, code.org.
Mhm.
And we do robotics through 4-H, so
Mhm.
you have to be specific. But tell us, how did your son get into robotics in middle school?
Yeah, so our son Zachary found the robotics. It was a camp that he found in the summer at Nova, and
Okay.
so if you look at it, Northern Virginia Community College has robotics camps and things along those lines. He found that and was just really, and just enthralled and just hooked from that moment on. So I would look
I
to your
love it.
local community college for options for things along those lines, and also many cities have, a lot of these things happen through camps. And then
Yes.
his football coach, he was involved, he and my other son were involved in a homeschool sports football league, and their coach owns a robotics company. So you talk about a mentor. Because of his involvement in the camp, he was able to get an internship as a high school student working in his robotics company. So those
That's
things,
great.
can really be good for them.
All right. Sherry says, I'm stuck. I'm not sure what to do about language arts and history with my
Um,
autistic sixth and seventh grader. He's so brilliant about writing, creative thinking, seeing things and expressing himself is rough. But let's just
yeah.
talk a little bit about language arts and history, if we can, in terms of
Mhm.
middle school. One of the things that I
Mhm.
notice about curriculum, when your kid is kind of in that elementary school, you may have one subject,
Mhm.
one curriculum for every subject. I
Mhm.
find, and I don't know if this is true for you, as my kids get a little older, I have a tendency to use something for language and something for history and
Mhm.
something for, Spanish and something for math, that it's not just the one curriculum. And I think sometimes that's a big transition for
Mhm.
parents who kind of had one stop for every subject. So
Yeah.
be willing to stretch out and find out, who's the expert in writing, how can a great curriculum in language arts tied to the individual needs that my middle school student has. What would you say about the curriculum part in terms of language, history, math, science?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think sometimes when we're feeling stuck, it's because what we're doing or what we're using is no longer working. If this is a
Yes.
student who's bright and interested, then you have to explore a little bit and find what works. We are educational consultants, like LaNissir said, that we have a special needs department. They would be more than willing to help you brainstorm and find some options, that would work a little bit more for your son. Language arts, they're important, learning how to express yourself, how to communicate, learning about, reading and things along those lines, and then applying those things in a historical context is very important. All of the subjects work together. And so there are some curricula that are literature based, and then there's some that are history based that make it a little more interesting. So you'd have to maybe play detective a little and find out what, like, are you stuck or is he stuck? What's the issue there? And like Lanissa said, be willing to be flexible to find what works and think outside of the box. It's one of the benefits of homeschooling.
Yes. And one of my sons is special needs in that he's a speech pathologist. And so
Hmm.
when it came down to language, he was not always on level. And so there
Mm.
were other things that I put in place
Hmm.
unique to what his needs were for language. And I think that's the beauty of homeschooling. You can individualize the education for the child that's in front of you.
Can you
You
say
don't
a
have
little
to have
about what you
one.
did? Yeah. Yeah. What did you do
Yeah, so he
to
he needed
personalize
more.
it for him?
more on articulation,
Mm,
he needed more on spelling, he needed more on language, and so I was able to pull away, use different grades, right, to get him up to
mhm,
speed. I think
mm,
sometimes we
mhm.
get, connected too stuck on, it's 6th grade and you have to do everything in the 6th grade
Good
book,
point.
right? You
Right,
don't
that's
have to
right.
do everything in the 6th grade book. Maybe there's an element that they didn't catch that's in the 5th grade book that they need
Absolutely.
to bring forward. And I love this. A funny story in our house is that I had one of my students who was working on division and
Mhm,
really hadn't mastered the multiplication.
mhm.
Division is painful without multiplication. I was
Yes, it
like, close
is.
that book. Let's start back.
Yeah.
And what a difference it made, a week later, 2 weeks later when we
Mhm.
opened up the division again. So I think that's what's beautiful about homeschooling is that you really can do what's best. We're not teaching a test. We are teaching kids for mastery on the subject that they're in. So it's
That's right.
exciting. And that
Yeah.
alone, Carla, would you agree? That takes the stress away. I know sometimes parents, we
Yes.
think, oh, my kid's going to get behind. Behind who is what I
That's
always
right. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And sometimes it's helpful to take a break from the curriculum.
yes.
Sometimes it's helpful to take a break. There are videos. I don't know if this is a student or others out there who are listening who would respond. My both of my sons love story. So sometimes it was helpful to have them approach the subject from a story standpoint. You can watch
Yeah.
videos together, you can read together, there's historical fiction, there's all kinds of things that would incorporate the language arts as well as the history, and do it in a way that would be enjoyable for both of you. Sometimes you get bored doing the same thing all the time, and sometimes a little bit of a break from the norm can help reinvigorate your activities in your homeschool.
Yes, and let's not forget about getting outdoors and field trips. I
Oh,
mean, I
yeah,
have my son
yeah.
who, he just was bored with our history
Mhm,
and he just seemed very lethargic when it came down to when history came. But when I took him out to the Junior Ranger program and
mhm.
going to all the national parks and getting a chance to see history live,
Right.
he came alive. So I love it. It's springtime now. Get outdoors,
Yeah,
learn history outdoors, go to
that's
your
right.
national parks, go
Yes,
camping. I'm the
yes.
camping girl. I'm the
Yeah,
road
no, the
schooler,
RV
right?
girl.
So right. So get out, and I have a feeling that sometimes you'll get a chance to learn a subject that might have been a little difficult indoors or
Mhm,
on paper.
mhm,
Now all of a sudden they're learning how the Washington Monument was
mhm.
built and, what's happening at the Jefferson Memorial and so on and so forth. So it makes a big, big difference
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
outdoors.
With a child with autism, I don't know if there's sensory issues, but I know there's living history exhibits all over the country,
Yes.
that also can educate and teach, but also do so in a way that might be a more engaging and help motivate a little bit differently. But that would have to be, individually discerned based on what the students' issues are, how they present with the autism struggle. But that's
Awesome.
another idea to consider.
Yes. Now we're moving on to Amanda. Amanda asked a
Okay.
question about study skills and time management. How do you teach middle school students about study skills and time management? You need to teach high school students about study skills and mind, and even adults, right? Study skills and
Oh,
time
it is
management.
so true.
So
Yeah.
please, I want you to share yours first. Give me your hot tip about study
Well,
skills and time management for middle school.
so one of the things that we did is we gave them they took a time management and study skills class at a co-op. That was one
I
of the
love
things that
that.
they did. And the
Yes.
other thing is, it was really important to my husband to have me begin to transition. Now, he wanted me to be out of a job at some point, and so he wanted them to take on a little bit more responsibility. And I think the 6th through 8th grade years are a perfect time to begin to do that. Give them the responsibility, give them a planner, and have them map out their day or their week with your supervision. Now is a perfect time, again, like I said, to do that. Test it in little bits, give them little bits of opportunity, to do that, and then give feedback. We are in a perfect position to give observations to our children. You know what? I observed this, or I think that, it might be helpful if you were to do this. Model it for them, be a good example for them, and then also observe what you see and offer. as they get older, we lose a little leverage, as I was saying, and so now is the time to have them
Yes.
build those habits when they're a little more willing to listen to us and to heed our wisdom a little.
I
You know,
I love that.
yeah.
Yes to all of everything you said. And it's so funny, like when I started homeschooling, seems like eons ago, his
Mhm.
biggest concern was, is this legal? Can we do this? And
Yeah.
he was concerned about all of what I call the soft skills, the study
Sure.
management, the time
Sure.
management. Was there
Yeah.
going to be some sort of structure? And what I love is looking at personalities.
Yeah.
I'm the Myers-Briggs girl, and I really
Mhm.
love to
Mhm.
look at that there are some students who struggle with time management, adults,
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
who struggle with it. And so, whereas there's one person who can write a list and keep it and use it, there's others who will write a list and lose it. And
That's
so
right.
we have to make sure that we're mindful that you have children who will struggle a bit and
Mhm.
kind of put in the big rocks, showing
Mhm.
up on time and
Yes.
helping them prepare the night before,
Mhm.
helping them maybe even set a time clock to say, hey, be in your workspace, for
Mhm.
30 minutes at a time,
Mhm.
those kinds of things that you build students up to their strength. But
That's
just
right.
acknowledging the fact that many people do struggle with managing their time. And
Yeah,
so,
they
and maybe
do.
that's your child. So being able to look so that there's not one specific way that students learn how to study or manage their time. So be creative, reach out. To us at the educational office, we would love to be able to help you and get a chance to know kind of how the flow goes in your home. Because
Yeah.
would you agree, Carla, kind of how mom and dad flows has a lot to do with how the children flow, right?
Yeah, that's very
Inside the
true.
house.
Yeah, that is very true. And I think the other thing is to notice how they're different from us. You were talking about, those time management skills, and the way they study might look different than the way you studied or the way that I studied. My boys are
Yes.
very musically inclined. They love music. And so for them to have music on while in their earphones while they were studying, it used to drive me nuts because I thought, how are you
Yes.
retaining information
Yes,
while you're
yes,
doing that? And yet they both did really well,
right.
and so so I think, acknowledging that sometimes what we see as not managing time well or not doing well might just be a difference in approach. And
Yes,
again, that's where I think that along with the things that you said, Lanissa, that, communicating with them and asking them, you know, just asking good questions, I think is always really important as a parent, becoming Columbo,
yes.
for those who remember the detective Columbo.
Yes, I love that. And acknowledging introvert versus extrovert.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
know I'm an extrovert, so I would bring all the kids around the table and I wanted them to kind of learn in that
Mhm.
atmosphere. And some
Mhm. Mhm.
introverts really want to be in their quiet spaces. They don't want to
Right.
join all the other siblings. Of course,
Absolutely.
we're the James party of 9. Well, we're 11 with our 2 puppies now. And so, everyone can't retain information in a group space. So I
That's
think
right.
that has a lot to do with the study skills. Let's
Yeah.
try a couple more questions here.
Okay.
We have a question here, and it says homeschoolers in general seem to become more eclectic the longer they home educate. And I believe
Mm.
that is part of the growing process for us
Mhm.
as home educating parents. Would you say that homeschoolers can become very eclectic? It doesn't have to be, even as they move into high school, very rigid. Do you want to talk about that aspect of homeschooling?
Yeah, I think that's one of the values, and I think if we again, I talk a lot about, detaching a little from the nuts and bolts and looking at what it is that we're doing. We're not just building a transcript, we're not just building a resume, as I think you mentioned earlier. We're helping our children build a life of
Yes.
meaning and of purpose, and that takes shape in different ways as they grow. We evolve and grow and change, and I think that, moving with that, being allowing ourselves to be flexible is really important. I think that one of the biggest things that parents have a difficult time with in the beginning is feeling like they have to do school in the way that they did school. And think about it, most of us who are homeschooling now were not homeschooled ourselves, so we're doing something that we didn't experience ourselves. I know that there's another generation of homeschoolers that exist, now. But for a number of us, we were not, and so I think that it's important to just consider afresh what it is that we're doing, and
Yes.
keep that why in mind.
Yes, I love that. I love all of that, Carla. And I know for us, we are officially in our what we call an eclectic homeschool mode after April.
Mhm.
So we have our traditional that kind of starts in September. We
Mhm.
break in December. We're very eclectic. So we have these eclectic months, if you will.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
December, it's
Mhm.
April, May, June through
Mhm.
the summer, July, August,
Mhm.
and then of course we're a little bit more structured in September. And
Mhm.
I think that the children look forward to that.
Mhm.
Look forward to finding new ways to learn the subject matter without the
Mhm.
book in hand.
Right.
So,
Right.
being eclectic is such a beauty of homeschooling, and we hope
Mhm.
that you continue to take advantage of it and
That's
get
right.
outdoors. That
That's right.
makes a difference. Yes. We have another person who posted the question. Um, she says, Lisa, she says, my son is going into ninth grade and he is
Mhm.
nowhere near ready academically ready.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
she says, we're considering that since he's way behind, what should we do? Should we put him in public education? What do we do with the high school? What
Mm.
happens? Let's just talk about
Mhm.
a middle school student who is behind.
Mhm.
And I want to say something while you're thinking about your
Mhm.
answer.
Mhm.
I love the beauty in homeschooling to review.
Mm.
Just like I gave the example
Mhm.
of my student who was working on division and had
Right.
not mastered the
Multiplication.
multiplication, how
Right.
we were able to close the book.
Right.
I think where we get a little worried is that when the book says level 9, level 10, or 6,
Mhm.
7th,
Mhm.
8th, and if we can't do what's inside the book, we we feel defeated, all of us as
That's right.
parents. And
That's right.
so it's okay to close the book and say, you know what, let's get a better basis, stronger foundation on your math, stronger foundation on
Mhm.
your writing skills, stronger foundation on your reading.
Mhm.
And what you'll find is that when you open that book later, and I cannot tell you how my library at home has
Mhm.
become filled with books that when I got it, I was like, okay, we're not going to be able to work on this yet, but
Mhm.
we're going to work on this and it'll bring us to this.
Mhm.
So that is always, and so I always say, if you have a student who is approaching, you have an eighth grader who's approaching ninth grade and they're just not ready, keep going.
Mhm.
Keep going in the book that you're using. Just because
Mhm.
ninth grade starts doesn't mean that you have to open up all of these high school materials that they're not ready.
Right.
Summer times becomes a review. And I
Mhm.
have in many occasions had the beginning of my homeschool years, of the new year
Mhm.
be a review of the previous year. So I
Right.
think that that's a nice window, if you will, to
Right.
kind of see where your child falls. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the other question to ask is she says that he's behind. Is he behind, categorically in every subject or just in some areas? Because
It's a
one
good
of the other
question.
things that you talked about is that, the maybe he can do ninth grade work in some subjects and continue in, building some of the foundational principles, do some remediation and while you're doing remediation in some of those other areas. And so, I think going into high school is usually it's a point where a lot of parents decide, you know what, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And I
Yes.
think if you were to just consider the academics, then I could see the temptation for that. But one of the things, and obviously I'm biased, but I think that the home through high school is still the best place, one of the best places to educate your children. If you can continue to do it, then I think it's worth it to find strategies to make it work and to adapt to the level of the child. So we talked about in the beginning that middle schoolers are developing cognitively, but it's not all linear. They don't all
Right.
grow and develop the capacity for certain things at the same time or at the same rate as other people. And sometimes there's gaps, and so we wait for them to mature a little in certain areas, and we build them up in those areas that they are doing well, so that
I
you
love
have a
that.
sense of success, so that they don't have a sense of failure. I think one other thing, and you got this behind you. I think it's really important to build, we got this, we can do this, make it positive, keep it success oriented and not focus on, the deficits. Keep it moving forward and positive. I think that's really
Yes.
helpful for parent and for student.
Yes, and I had that situation with my Leo, who was working on building his language skills, but he was doing amazing in math. And
Yes,
so
see? Mhm.
I intentionally picked a math curriculum that would read to him
Right.
and that would give him some of the skills, and that allowed him to move ahead. And so, of course,
Absolutely.
that's why today he's doing amazing in his STEM right?
That's
While
right.
he's building his language ability. So I
Yeah.
love what you said, Carla, about
Yeah.
whether or not academically, if it's every subject or just a few.
Right.
Let's take another question.
Okay.
Douglas says, my middle school student is setting his own goals and managing his time with the rewards being extra free time at the end of the week, etc.
Mhm. Mhm.
He said, we did this with my high school daughter, and she is now basically self-instructing her senior year. Let's
Mm.
talk about the independence, if you
Mhm.
will.
Mhm.
And I'm the person who really keeps my hands on my students. However, I give them independence in areas that I know that they can do on their own. Let's talk about what we can do to help middle school students be a little more independent. Would
Mhm.
you agree? In elementary school, they need a lot of support. But as we
Mhm.
move into middle school, we want to kind of start paying attention to the skills that they can do without you.
That's right.
One of the things, here's my hot tip. I would have this box, this place where my students could leave the material
Mhm.
that they needed my help on.
Mhm.
That way,
Mhm.
when we circled up, because we have this circle time, it
Mhm.
could be twice a week, it could be daily. It's
Mhm.
totally up to you. Then
Right.
we would review, because
Right.
you don't want your kids, particularly your middle school student, waiting for you.
Right.
And if you're like me and you have multiple children, they could be waiting a long time, right? So, so really teaching them those independent skills of trying to figure out the answer, solve their own problems,
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
being able to circle back with them to be
Mhm.
able to inspect what you expect in terms of
Mhm.
working with your student. What would you say on this topic?
Well, I love that. Inspect what you expect. I think that's really important. And I think one of the things to know is that's one of the things that gives homeschool students an edge when they go off into the military, when they go to work, when they go to college, is their ability to be self-starters, their ability to be independent, their critical thinking ability. They're just eager. They generally, obviously there's individual differences that we need to be aware of, and, we know that. But I think in general, they do quite well, and I think it happens because we allow them the opportunity to grow in those ways, right? To encourage that
Yes.
independence and to do it in a way that where it's safe. We're their safety plan. We're there to rescue. We're there to help. And I think it's important that independent doesn't mean that they are emancipated. you know, we're still
Right.
there,
Mhm.
right? We're still there in a position of authority and wisdom. Hopefully, again, hopefully they chronicle that and heed that.
Yes.
And so I think that that's important. So that he has students who are already doing that, and having a daughter who's self-teaching at this age, I think is really important. And find ways, I think, while they're young and while they're still at home, to still be involved in something, some activity. Maybe you're not in charge of their academics anymore. That gives you a break. As you get on in age, it gives you a chance. If you've been homeschooling for a long time and that's been your primary focus, them taking more initiative in their own studies gives you a chance to think, okay, what's next? What's next for me? But it also gives you an opportunity to develop a relationship in another way. For my oldest son and I, it was watching movies. That was one of the things that we enjoyed. So we stayed connected while he, maybe I wasn't involved as much. He was doing dual enrollment and involved in co-op and things along those lines. I did oversight, but finding some other ways to stay, to keep that relationship going I think is
I
really
love that.
important.
Yes, I love that. Here's another question about Rosalind said that she was told to talk to your state educator coordinator and
Okay.
they would help you with accredited curriculums. I want you to know we have a team of an amazing attorneys here at
Mhm.
HSLDA. Our attorneys and our legal assistants will help you understand the laws for your state and what's
Mhm.
required in terms of if accreditation is required, because accreditation is not necessarily tied to any individual curriculum, if you
Mhm.
will.
Mhm.
And so it's, so sometimes when you're coming out of a public school setting, you're running around looking for accreditations
Yeah.
that will allow them to kind of go back to school. We really want to walk you through that process. So be sure to reach out to us. I want you to consider us as your guidance counselors, if you
Mhm.
will,
Mhm.
your homeschooling process. We have several offices. We have our tot to tween or preschool to teen, which is kind of pre-K to 8th grade
Right.
department. And then we have our high school department, which is 9th through 12th grade. And then we also have our special needs department. So a lot of times, if you get connected to find out exactly what you need, what your state is requiring, because every state is a little bit different,
Right.
that will really take the stress off of homeschooling in terms of curriculum.
Yeah.
So that I think is important. What did you want to say about curriculum and accreditation?
Yeah, I think that's important as well. In fact, I think that's one of the first things is when you're thinking about how to get started, what curriculum do I choose, is to look at your state regulations, look at your state homeschool law. For example, some states like New York require standardized testing. I think in alternate years when you're not in high school, but every year in high school, all 4 years, they require testing. So, and there's paperwork that needs to be filed. So as you said, you want to be able to homeschool legally, you want to be able to do so freely. And so making sure that you're complying with the homeschool law is important. And that's something where, obviously HSLDA, we can connect them to people who are attorneys who can help them with that. It's really important.
Yes, yes. And we just love sending those calls to our legal team, which
Mm-hmm.
they are absolutely amazing.
Absolutely.
So here's another question. Interest-driven learning
Mm.
and handout activities, I guess maybe like unit studies. I love this topic. Okay, that was Douglas.
Okay.
I find that if you have a student who is interested in what they're learning,
Mm-hmm.
you now have a learner, a lifelong learner.
Absolutely.
That's so very important.
Mm-hmm.
And everything has an opportunity for you to grow. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you could see, flowers blooming, and now you have a botany class. You can see birds flying or bees buzzing
Mm-hmm.
or butterflies flying, and now you have another class on insects. I think that when kids are connected to what they're learning, they're more interested.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you still can have it. This is a funny story. When we travel from Maryland, because we're road schoolers, we're also doing homeschooling in Virginia, and we would find ourselves in different states, and there would inevitably be someone who would say, "Is this school? Is this homeschooling?" And my daughter, LaNissir, she was in the process of doing a strawberry garden down at our family beach, and
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Yeah, this is botany."
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Or
That's
they're
right.
sitting down and they're just having some quality time with their grandparents. Well,
Yeah.
that's history, you
Absolutely.
know?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
so,
Yeah.
sometimes I think as parents, we need to kind of put it in a subject to kind of feel better. But I really think that life is a learning tool for all
Mm-hmm.
of us,
Mm-hmm.
all aspects of life.
Yeah.
And you can, if I had a child with me right now, this would be television production. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, these guys
Mm-hmm.
are amazing here.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's so much, and I love what Douglas said about interest driven, and
Yeah,
those classes become an opportunity for your child to see what their interest
that's
is.
right.
I know for me, loving television and cameras, et cetera, started very young,
That's
and
right.
so it was because of the exposure to it. So this interest driven also becomes career based too,
Yeah,
wouldn't you say?
I do. I do. I think that is important. And I think that's also the key if you have a student who's struggling with feeling motivated, sometimes, finding a way to tap into what their interests are can help a student buy in a little bit more, be more
Yeah.
invested, more involved in getting through. I think that's really important. But I think it's also important to know that there are some things that they need to be prepared for to high school that they're not always interested in, right? Some things they
Yes.
just have to get through. So you find ways like, okay, this is painful for you. It's painful for me because it's painful for you. Let's just get through let's get
Right.
through this and spend the bulk of our time building those interests and building those things that, that might be a little bit more meaningful to you down the road, right? A student
Yes.
who is
Yes.
not interested in math, sometimes there's not much you can do to make them interested in math, but they have to find ways to get through it. We can certainly help
Yes.
with that. The educational consultants, there's so many different curricula out there, to tap into that. But anyway, I think it's important also to recognize that some aspects of school, we just have to get through to get to the other
Yes.
stuff.
Yes. And I love to kind of keep the subject going, but change the approach.
Mm,
So if I
mhm,
have a student who is struggling in math,
mhm.
and I love it, then I'll put a bunch of money. I've even taken the grocery bill and
Mhm.
handed it to the students.
Right.
And whereas normally they're not adding, all of a sudden I see my kids calculating and making sure it's valued and all that good stuff. It instantly it would have been what they would have done on paper,
That's
but now they have
right.
opportunity to do it in the grocery store. And then I have
Yeah.
some students that I work with in chemistry, whereas they were struggling in the written version of chemistry, but when I pull out those experiments,
See,
oh
oh,
my
they love
goodness,
it. They
they're
light up, right?
right, right. So there's ways that you can kind of turn the table a little bit and kind of keep the subject going. I think
Yeah,
it's about being connected to other homeschoolers
right.
that can give you great
Yeah,
ideas
that's
to
true.
do what it is you do.
That's true.
So we're almost done here, and I want to
Okay.
pick a couple of more questions. If you haven't gotten a chance to post your questions, please do, because we would love to try to answer some of your questions. Um, I want to talk to you a little bit about time. This is Desiree.
Mhm,
She says, if my student is completing their work by 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon every day,
mhm.
what are some suggestions on how the rest of the day can be spent?
Mm, that's a good question.
A good question.
And
Yeah, I love
I
that.
would love to know how old the student is. How did she say how
Let's
old?
assume middle school. Let's assume middle
Okay.
school. So if
So
she's got a middle school student who finishes early, that's great.
mhm. Yeah. So that's a time to be involved in some of those life skills that we talked about. So your day, I would imagine, probably doesn't end at 12 or 1. There's probably still things that the parent needs to do, and they can incorporate the child into some of those activities. And sometimes it's okay for them to have free time. There is
Yes.
so much that is required of our students once they get into high school and college and life. And these are the years to dream. These are the years to just be. Sometimes it's that downtime, that dreaming time that does to inform what they end up doing either as an interest or a hobby down the road. Now, if they're complaining about being bored or if something that's a little bit different, then you might want to, build some activity into that time, give some extra assignments. It's kind of like what you talked about, get outside, if it's possible. But I also think that sometimes, having free time when they're young is actually a healthy thing. I think it can be really
Yes.
good for them. What do you think?
Yes,
Do you
I
agree?
love what my oldest homeschooler. We started homeschooling her. She is now graduated college and she's very successful. But one of the things she said when we pulled her out of school, she was finishing up fourth grade, and she said, "Ma, oh my goodness, I have an extra 24 hours. I no longer have homework." Because because you think about it, if you're new to homeschooling and now your schoolwork and your work is done during the day, you do have double the amount of time. It's like a Geico commercial. You gotta
Mhm.
love it. And so I think that that's sometimes awkward for parents. And so what I love about it is that I think it teaches them to be ready for collegiate learning,
Mhm.
because collegiate learning is really set up with you setting your schedule, deciding
Mhm.
if you want morning classes,
Mhm.
afternoon classes,
That's right.
later classes. It's not necessarily driven on how much time you spend. It doesn't say you have to work between 8 and 3 in order to get it done. And I
Mhm.
think it also taps into the talents. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of times, when you're maybe offering a test or a quiz, maybe those are clues that perhaps a student needs more information they're
Mhm.
not retaining.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
other than that, I love to watch my students who know how to be very task oriented,
Mhm.
time management, and say, hey, I want to get outside and play some basketball. And so I'm going to get up early and get my work done by
Mm.
12.
Mhm.
That does not bother me a bit. In fact, I think
No,
that it's the beginning of time management. I
that's
love
right.
that.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
now you got to make sure that you're inspecting what you expect to
That's
make sure
it.
they didn't just
There
throw it
you
all
go.
together, right, and run outside. So,
Yeah,
there are some pieces to that.
yeah, that's right.
So, as we try to close, let's see who else has questions. Okay. How do you continue to homeschool your children with their hearts yearning to go back to public school?
Oh,
But this is God's call for you in this season. I
yeah.
love this question. Do you want to go
Yeah.
first? Or you want me to go first?
No, you go ahead. Sounds like you have a ready answer.
I do.
Yeah,
I have this workshop that we do called Happy Homeschooler at Every Age.
right.
And you always have to, and again, I'm assuming if a kid wants to go back to public school, evidently they've been in public school at one point,
Mhm.
which was similar to my oldest daughter. And so one of the things that was important for me was to not replicate school, but
Mhm.
to set the atmosphere so that the things that we loved most, we can continue.
Mhm.
And it wasn't about being around 2,000 kids at one time. It was about building healthy relationships
Mhm.
with people who we cared and loved.
Mhm.
And so that was an opportunity as homeschoolers to be able to have more time to do that.
Right.
And so I was able to really lean in to find out what they were yearning for most. And a lot of times it's the connections,
Right.
it's the love. It was the sports. You know,
Mhm.
I had some junior Olympic gymnasts, not one, but four junior Olympic gymnasts. And so being able to keep them connected to their field of sports, etc. They also had more of a buy-in because they really had the ability to enjoy school, enjoy life more.
Mhm.
My kids are so funny. They're just comedians. They say, "Mom, we bring our book bags at night when we go with the sports because we feel bad. You know, they got school all day, school all night. They're all, you know." And I thought, wow, well, that's creative. And that's also caring to not make people feel bad about it.
Mhm.
But I find that my kids really enjoyed some of the benefits. And so sometimes when they're yearning to go back, you haven't identified the pros and cons to homeschooling. And
Mhm.
this was a big pro. And then also when we look ahead, just like what your children did, Carla, we did dual enrollment.
Mhm.
So they were able to be on college settings earlier.
Mhm.
They were able to do programs that other kids were not able to do, learn skills that other kids don't have time to learn. And
Mhm.
so there were so many things. I mean, we have a laundry list. Call
Mhm.
me at HSLDA. We have
Mhm.
a laundry list of so many reasons why homeschooling and homeschooling through high school is a winner
Yeah,
for, for many families. Of course, we acknowledge the fact that it may not work for all families,
that's
and
right.
perhaps something may be going on in the home in terms of maybe mom works a full-time job and she's homeschooling and she needs some tips about how to do it while she's working full time and
Mhm.
so on and so forth. Sometimes those are the reasons that take the joy out of homeschooling. What would
Yeah.
you say?
Well, I would say it's heartbreaking sometimes when we're excited about something and this person specifically said they felt that God was calling them to it. And so you're giving them what you think is a gift from God and they don't want it. That's first of all, I want to acknowledge that it's a difficult thing to hear for and to deal with in your children. And I think it's important if this person is talking about their relationship with God to really pray about that, to ask God to give
Yes.
wisdom about how do I impart this to my child? How do I let them know how important this is, why we want this, what our heart is for them, what our goals are for them? And I think it's important to let them know about that, that you're answering to a higher authority and that they need to do so as well. And you want to make sure that you do it in love, right? That you don't want it to become conflictual, that, God has our best interests at heart. I have your best interests at heart. Sometimes we don't always understand, and so it's a good teaching tool about submission. It's a good teaching tool about those things that they will definitely run into down the road. But again, what you always want to do is preserve relationship. And I think, LaNissir, the things that you mentioned help build relationship as you problem solve together how to make homeschool more attractive to a child whose heart may be calling them somewhere else.
Yes. I love that. I love that advice. And there's some course people asking questions about homeschooling in New York. If you need help
Mm,
homeschooling and knowing how to do it, our legal team is definitely, you want to be a member at HSLDA so that we can walk you through
mhm,
that process. And
mhm,
so I tell you, we were at a conference and we were figuring it out that it was literally 35 cents a day.
mm.
35 cents a day to be a member of HSLDA, to have an amazing team with beautiful people like you, Carla, and all of our educational
Right.
consultants. Individually, they're awesome, but collectively they're beyond description. God has
Yeah.
called us for such a time as this, and it's just amazing.
Yeah.
This time has been so
It's
wonderful.
flown
And
like the 4
yes,
years of high
yes,
school. It's just flown right by.
yes, exactly. So there's more. We have more for you. I just want to close one last subject, and this will be a quick answer about
Okay.
testing. What kind of
Mhm.
testing do you recommend or do you recommend testing at all for middle school students?
Absolutely, I do, especially for those who are thinking about going to college because they'll have the college entrance exams. I think it's important to be comfortable in a testing environment. I asked
Mhm.
my son, what is one thing, if you could go back and talk to high school homeschoolers, what would you say? And he said, test, test, test. That's really important, with, again, his engineering programs, a lot of that. I think being
Yes.
comfortable with it and learning how you take tests, how you approach them, how you study for them is really important. Some states require standardized testing, and I think that some subjects require an evaluation of some kind to know how the student is doing. And so call it a test, call it an evaluation, call it an assessment, whatever you call it. I think there are times to know how your student is doing and to get that feedback so that you can make
Wonderful.
adjustments as you need to.
Well, this has been wonderful. And this is
Yeah.
all the time we have for our
Yeah.
Q&A live. And you may have questions that didn't get answered. Well, we want you to know that we have so many resources available for you at HSLDA. We have webinars, we have our Facebook Lives, and we'll be sending links below of how you can connect. We have another live coming up, and we really want you to stay connected so that you can get all the right answers about your homeschooling. So, Carla, did you want to say something in closing?
Well, just that it's been a pleasure to be on this Facebook Live with you, LaNissir, and to talk to all of the people who are out there having their really good questions. Just hang in there. You got this, and we've got you. And don't forget that this Q&A is part 2 of 5, and we'll be hosting 3 more Q&As focused on one coming up as on high school specifically, homeschooling kids with special needs. And we even have a Q&A in Spanish on March 30th, which we're excited about. 2 of our bilingual consultants, Kareem and Clarissa, will be hosting and answering all of the questions in Spanish. So if you have friends or a family member who are homeschooling, who would like to, where Spanish is their primary language and would like to do the Q&A that way, then we invite you to join us. We'll have all that information in the comments, and we'd like you to spread the word.
Yes. Well, we want to thank you for watching today. Carla, it was so great
It was a
getting to know
pleasure.
you.
Yes.
You are amazing. Thank you so much for all of your sharing. We appreciate you, and we thank you guys all for watching.
Thank you,
Bye
guys.
for now. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's team of educational consultants. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the number of curriculum options to choose from? Or maybe you're frustrated because your child is struggling and you're not sure what to do next. Our educational consultants can help. As an HSLDA member, you have access to customized, practical guidance on everything from lesson planning and record keeping to helping a child with learning difficulties. If you want to experience less frustration and more progress in your homeschool, get support from our educational consultants by becoming a member of HSLDA. Learn more at hslda.org/join. That's hslda.org/join. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you enjoyed this conversation, leave a review to let us know what you think. To hear more conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to this podcast or head on over to hslda.org/podcast for more inspiring stories and awesome ideas about homeschooling. That's all for today. We hope you enjoyed the program, and we'll see you next time.